Namo tasse bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhase. Namo tasse bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhase. Namo tasse bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhase. Today we are going to talk about what is the real Theravāda Buddhism. We will talk about the three schools of Buddhism, that is Vajrayana Buddhism, Mahayana Buddhism, and Theravāda Buddhism. And we'll just briefly talk about Mahayana and Tibetan, because that's something that I don't really know much about anymore these days. We will talk about what is in common with these three schools, and we'll talk about what is vastly different. We'll talk about the Theravāda texts. We'll be specializing in Theravāda after we talk about the differences, and we'll talk about the texts of Theravāda Buddhism, and we'll talk about the commentary and the Abhidhamma. This is a spoiler alert that is what is different for Theravāda Buddhism, very different. We'll give an example of why they are important, why we should follow them, why they are necessary, and we'll talk about the Theravāda, how Theravāda might look like it includes some other forms such as Suttanta or EBT, but how they are different and how they don't match. So, with Vajrayana Buddhism, this is called the diamond vehicle. It comes from Tibet mostly. Bhutan also incorporates this type of Buddhism as a national religion. Tibet probably doesn't include it anymore because it's now part of China. But Vajrayana Buddhism in general, we could say it is deity worship. It has secret teachings, these initiations, which are kept secret, and they have like empowerment where the guru can empower you, and even I've read that the 𝗀𝗂𝗯𝘀𝗰𝗋 initiation is supposed to do some things which are just not possible in Theravāda Buddhism. It incorporates as a major factor the bodhisattva path, and that is to eventually to become a Buddha, and they have different definitions of that. We'll talk about that in Mahayana as well. And that is pretty much what Tibetan Buddhism is. They have a monastic lineage, and they also have a lay, sort of a lay monastic lineage. They wear robes, but they're essentially lay people because they are married, and they can marry in some cases. So sometimes they're monks, and sometimes they look like monks, but they're just what they call lamas. But sometimes a lama is a monk. So you have to inquire within to find out if they are an ordained monastic, a bhikkhu. They usually use the word bhikkhu, and because they're Sanskrit based, and they're also based in their own language as well. Mahayana Buddhism, originally there was Mahayana and Hinayana, and Mahayana separated, and they named themselves the greater vehicle, and the other school was called the inferior vehicle. Hina means inferior, and they separated not long after the parinibbana of the Buddha. It was early on, but after the Buddha passed away. And it is also the bodhisattva path. It comes mostly from China, Korea, Japan, and Vietnam. And so these are predominantly the Mahayana. These are the Mahayana countries. But they have obviously other religions, and in some cases they even have Theravada. There are some Theravada monasteries in China. There are Theravada monasteries in America, but we can't really say that America is predominantly is Buddhist. So we could say it's predominantly Christian or atheist and secular for sure. So this also incorporates the Mahasangika school and the Dharmagupta schools, and it also has a strong focus on Amitabha Buddha. And this Amitabha Buddha is the Buddha of infinite light. Sometimes in Japan they call it Amita Buddha, and sometimes you might hear in China they call it Amitofu or some. I think that's what it says. I could be wrong. And they take a few of their specialized Mahayana, the Mahayana sutras, and it's sutra with the R, and these are Sanskrit based, and or they're in Chinese. Now they're in Chinese, and for instance, they would have the White Lotus Sutra, the Diamond Sutra. We have the Sanskrit. They're Sanskrit, and they're also based in Chinese language, and sometimes we even call it a Mahayanese because it's so centralized in the Chinese language and the Chinese people. And usually, like the Korean Mahayana scholars or the Japanese scholars, even the Vietnam Mahayana scholars, Vietnamese Mahayana scholars, they will actually learn Chinese to be a very proficient Mahayana scholar. So Theravada, this talk is about Theravada. We're not going to spend a lot of time on the Mahayana, but I didn't talk about the Bodhisattva path with the Mahayana as I promised. So the Bodhisattva path is, the goal is to become a Buddha, and it gets a little strange for me how they describe it. They say that everyone goes to the Pure Land, and they make a vow to become a Buddha. They're a Bodhisattva, and they won't become a Buddha. They will delay their enlightenment until all beings are enlightened. And that's the general story of Mahayana. They also say that they can become Buddha in this life. Buddha, when they say like that, it seems a little strange for me. If they mean getting enlightenment but not being a bodhisattva, then that can make sense, but I think they still remain a bodhisattva and they get enlightenment at the same time. Again, I'm not really familiar with this, but this is something that I remember from the 90s when I was studying it myself. I don't think it's changed much, but definitely I'm rusty on it. So if there's any mistakes, just take what I'm saying about the Mahayana and Tibetan path with a grain of salt. Of course, the Theravada has the Arahant way as the main way of the main goal of salvation, or we could say the main goal of Buddhism is to escape from samsara as quick as possible and as safely as possible. The safest way is the quickest way, but also through not going through dangerous realms of woeful states, avoiding going to hell and or animal realms or ghost realms, to try to get enlightenment as quick as possible. Obviously, if you're human, this would be in the human life and in this very life. So that's very important, and that is the main goal of Theravada Buddhism. We do have some people who desire to become a bodhisattva. Now, before I said bodhisattva, and now I'm saying bodhisattva. So one is a Sanskrit word, and one is a Pali word. And I prefer the Pali word because when they say bodhisattva, I'm not really sure what they're talking about. So, but when we talk about bodhisattva with a double T, then it's very clear. The bodhisattva wants to become a samma sambuddho, and the samma sambuddha. And this is the Buddha that you know in Theravāda Buddhism. So if you go to India, if you go to Bodh Gaya, this is, you know the story of the Buddha, you know that he spent a lot of time in samsara, for Sankhya and 100,000 years training to become a Buddha, and how long that takes. It takes a very long time. Sometimes we explain it in units of time as Big Bang cycles. You know, when the universe, it expands, and the acceleration decreases as time goes on, and due to the force of gravity of the other planets and stars and black holes, etc., and then slowly it comes together, and the universe comes into one point, and then it explodes again, another Big Bang. That is a really long time. So because of that, we can say maybe that is what an asankhya is. There would be 4 Big Bangs, but it's probably much longer than that. So it's just a way of speaking. It's usually it's an unfathomable amount of time, or an uncountable amount of time. And so this is what, if someone takes a bodhisattva vow, they are prepared to roam samsara and go through samsara for a very, very, very long time, which is not easy, and there's so much suffering that one does. But they get to become a Buddha, they get to save humanity and teach the teachings, and it's very wonderful if we have such courageous beings. But we should, of course, read the fine print before we take a bodhisattva vow, and we should know what one is getting themselves into when they claim to become, or they take on the commitment to become a bodhisattva. Now, there's one other thing that I didn't say. That clock of 4 Big Bangs doesn't start ticking until you get a prediction from a living Buddha. There's like a whole initiation stage that happens as well before you get that prediction from a living Buddha in a real Buddha's time. Now, that could have happened before. There are previous Buddhas before the Buddha of our 𝗀𝗂𝗯𝗀𝗲 Buddha. This is the Buddha of our age, or our dispensation. But there are previous Buddhas before that. And so this is, it is possible that you could already be on your path. But we're very careful and cautious, and when we tell someone about the bodhisattva path, and usually a lot of times we have some monks who are very, very strong leaders. They can lead a whole organization with 1,000 monks, 2,000 monks, whatever, and multiple branch monasteries and stuff. And they are there was one of our lineage in the Sri Kalyana Yogashrama lineage that was able to. He is planning to become a Buddha in the future, and he's a bodhisattva. And we would say that his parami is very strong because he has wonderful qualities, he has leadership qualities, etc. There's I don't know how many monasteries there are, but maybe there's quite a few. There's nearly 1,000 monks, and we have quite a number of monasteries, and quite a few large and prominent monasteries as well. and he was leader. He's passed away. And this is Bhante Dhamma Mahatera. And so people are inspired to become a bodhisattva, but it's very, very rare. And we admire people who take this path. But the real path of Theravāda Buddhism is to attain enlightenment, to become an arhat by following the teachings, putting them into practice, and by doing that, one can remove the defilements and get rid of greed, hatred, and delusion, and become an arhat, and after that there's no more samsara. So this is the goal of Theravāda Buddhism. It is the teaching of the elders. Thera means elder, and Vada is the teaching. So it's the teaching of the elders. We could call it old school Buddhism. This could be a modern translation of it, but it's the teaching of the elders. And again, we encourage people to put the practice forth and to reach Nibbana safely and quickly. It's a very practice-oriented religion, and there's also a pariyatti aspect of it, study. You have to study the texts in order to know how the teachings can bring you to Nibbana. So that's basically it. If you're interested in the Bodhisattva path, I recommend a book. It's called The Great Chronicles of the Buddha. It is written by Mingung Sayadaw. He has passed away, but he is in Guinness Book of World Records for having the highest, the highest memory available. He's memorized the books of the three baskets. We call that the Tipitaka, and he's memorized so many books, and he's in Guinness Book of World Records. The path was, the texts were originally memorized, and that tradition was lost, and we used to recite them in groups, the Theravada tradition. And it's been proven as a very trustworthy way to preserve the texts, especially before they were written down, because we would chant them as groups, and so if one person forgot something, the rest of the group, let's say 100 monks, during that time Buddhism was more popular, they had maybe 100 monks or 50 monks maybe, or 10 monks, let's say, and the group could carry the missing words together. If one person forgot one word, then the other members would know that word, especially because they're chanting as a group and prompting each other as they're chanting. And there's so when we're chanting in groups, there's some chants I can do in a group, but I can't do by myself. Mingung Sayadaw, he was able to chant by himself. And there are other monks who are able to memorize the Tipitaka, the three baskets of the Theravada text. But there are some books, especially in the suttas, that they are allowed to leave out in order for this title to come. But for sure they have to memorize all the Vinaya books and the Abhidhamma books, and they memorize the Digha Nikaya. And one of the Sayadaws that I personally know, he's memorized the Anguttara Nikaya, he's memorized the commentary, a lot of the commentaries, and even the commentaries to the stories to the Dhammapada. So it was really wonderful to meet someone like that. So people, if you don't believe that it was an oral tradition, there are people in the past 100 years who have done it. There are people who I have personally known who have memorized, I think he memorized maybe 40 different volumes of books, yes. So what is common to all three schools? We have the Four Noble Truths and the Eightfold Noble Path. The Mahayana Tibetan paths, or the sects of Buddhism, sometimes I like to call them separate religions actually, they say that they follow the Four Noble Truths and the Eightfold Noble Path, and this is where there are some commonalities, because Theravāda for sure follows the Four Noble Truths and the Eightfold Noble Path. But there are many, many books of the Tipitaka, of the Theravāda texts. We have the commentaries also, we have the Vinaya, we have the suttas, we have the Abhidhamma, we have the commentaries, the sub-commentaries, and we even have other books that were also, they're part of the other books that were approved by the Chattasanggayana, the world meeting of the Theravāda Sangha. So this is what is common, and in the Chinese text they have many suttas which are extremely similar in the content, but some places they don't match up. Why don't they match up? Well, they have traveled a different path, and most likely before the texts were written down, they also had an oral tradition to keep it. But these were carried by sects, different religions of people, and they are from a group that split off because of doctrinal differences. And so that might be one reason why there are differences. And another reason is that these texts that are in Chinese, they were translated from Pali to the Sanskrit, and then from the Sanskrit they were translated into Chinese, and then from Chinese, in order for us to read it, it was translated into English. So it went through many translations, it went through a whole nother culture, it went through a different philosophical school, and so that's why some things can be different. And then obviously just the course of time could have changed some things. It's quite often that some things are missing from these Chinese early texts that match the suttas in many ways, but they might have some things missing, which is clearly understandable that some of these items might be lost in translation because it was translated so many times. So these things are also in common, but the commentaries are different, and the Abhidhamma is mostly different, or actually they're quite similar, but they have some key points which make them vastly different. So in terms of, so we could say that they're not compatible, even though that a lot of the Abhidhamma is very similar, because there are some key points that are very different, we could say that they are not compatible. The main sutras of the Mahayana and Tibetan Buddhism, the sect of Buddhism, they are not compatible with Theravāda Buddhism because they mostly focus on the Bodhisattva path, and they focus on, I think, the Pure Land, and they also focus on a different Buddha altogether. So for that reason, they are not compatible. The texts of Theravāda are we call that the Tipitaka. Ti means three, and Pitaka means basket. This is because they were carried, the books were carried in baskets. There were a lot of books. So it's in the Pali language, and it's written on palm leaves, and they're bound together, they're strung together. They're very long, they're about like 2 feet long, and maybe about 6 inches, 4 inches in width. So they're long and slender. They're a lot different than the books we have today. The Vinaya, there are three baskets. So first we have the Vinaya, we have the Sutta, and then we have the Suttas, and then we have the Abhidhamma. The Vinaya are the rules of the monastic life, and they cover everything to the color of our robes, how to wear the robes, how to ask for robes, what do we do when our robes are lost or stolen. It covers the lodging. It covers the four requisites, and that would be the robes, the food, the meals, and the lodging, and the medicine. For sure, it covers all of that, as well as the monastic code. So it has a lot of rules, a lot of explanations, but it also has the story of the Buddha. And they're very wonderful to read if you get a chance to read them. They have been translated, so you can read that in one of the books called the Mahāvāga. I'll explain the books in a little bit. We have the Sutta, Sutta Pitaka. So this is the basket of the teachings. The suttas are the teachings. And these are the discourses that you might have heard of before, that you might be most interested in. And they have many teachings in them. We have the Mahasatipatthana Sutta, we have the 𝗷𝗶𝗸𝗀𝗀𝗀 Sutta. So these might ring a bell. They're very wonderful teachings of the Buddha, and they were passed down. To Venerable Ananda, and he was able to teach the other monks everything he was able to teach, and then they recited this in the first council after the Buddha died. So the Sutta Pitaka contains the teachings, and the Abhidhamma contains, we could say, the higher teachings, or the matrix of teachings, or the detailed teachings, which covers mind and matter, and the mental components of the mind, and also the causes of that, and of course Nibbana. So that is the Abhidhamma in a nutshell. It's very complex. It has a matrix of mind and matter and mental components, and many different matrices to explain the inner workings and the low-level molecular Dhamma points of the Dhamma that you will find in the suttas. So in the Vinaya, this might get a little dry, but we should cover some of the books of the Vinaya. We have Parajika-pāli, Pācittiya-pāli, Mahāvāga, we have the Chula-vāga, we have the Pariwara-pāli. They usually end in Pāli, actually. All of them end in Pāli. And for the Mula texts, and these are what we call root texts, before we have the commentary. And so the Parajika and Pācittiya books, they cover the rules. We have 227 rules for the monastics, and the Mahāvāga and Chula-vāga cover the smaller rules, and they also have some parts have the story of the Buddha, as I said before, and then we have the Pariwara texts, and this is repetitions and summaries. It's called the accessories of the Vinaya, and so that's the Vinaya Pitaka. So the Sutta Pitaka is the teachings of the Buddha, the basket, and of the suttas, and they are organized according to the length and sometimes the organizational factors of the teachings. So the Digha Nikaya is the long teachings of the Buddha, and the Majjhima Nikaya is the middle-length discourses of the Buddha. And they have the teachings, some very famous teachings like the Mahaparinibbana Sutta is part of the long discourses, and the Anapanasati Sutta is part of the middle-length discourses. So the teachings are middle length and long discourses. The Samyutta Nikaya is based on the subject matter, so they're linked together, the connected discourses, and the connected discourses are organized by subject. So, for instance, if there's an interest in Anapana, there is Anapana Samyutta. So you can read a group of teachings based on the meditation on the mindfulness of the breath. You can read a group of teachings based on that, or the six sense bases. So you can read about that. So there's various groupings, and it's very large volume of. There's quite a few volumes. I think there's 5 volumes of the Samyutta Nikaya, and there are many groupings within each volume as well. We have the Anguttara Nikaya. The Anguttara Nikaya is based on the number content. What I mean by the number content, as earlier I said, we have the Eightfold Noble Path, and we have the Four Noble Truths. The Four Noble Truths, the Eightfold Noble Path is what we normally say, and this would be in the groupings of 4, and the other one, the Eightfold Noble Path, would be in the groupings of the 8s. So we have the Book of Ones, we have the Book of Twos, we have the Book of Threes, etc., all the way up to 11. And so this is everything is grouped. We have the 5 ways of this, the 4 ways of that, the 10 ways of this. There's a lot of overlap as well. Sometimes we have short lists, so we have expanded lists, and so you can. It's Buddhism by numbers, actually. So there's all these different groupings based on numbers, and this is found in the Anguttara Nikaya. This is 3 books. It's also very large. It's very large in its content. And lastly, we have the Kusaka Nikaya, which is the smaller discourses of the Buddha. And how do we cover all the books? There are too many to mention. But I'll cover, I don't know, maybe a top 10. Or we have the 𝗀𝗂𝗶𝗶 Pali. We have the Dhammapada Pali. Actually, I'm not going to say the Pali after the word. We have the Udana. We have the Sutta Nipata, we have the Petavatu. Let me explain some of these. So the 𝗀𝗂𝗶𝗶 and the Sutta Nipata, they have a lot of the parittas, like a lot of the blessings that we chant. They have a lot of that involved, and one is a shorter version of the other. We have the Dhammapada. The Dhammapada is a wonderful book of Buddhist, we say gatha or poetry, and this is said by the Buddha when certain things happened. There's a whole story behind most of the gathas, or all of the gathas, and of all the poetry sayings. And then after the story was finished, usually the Buddha he utters a poem, and this is the teachings of the Buddha, and many people revere this book. It's been translated so many times into so many languages, English alone so many times. And it's a wonderful and short book, and so if you want to pick one up, it's very easy. There's free copies on the internet, legally free, for general use, for Creative Commons use, so I recommend you pick a copy of that up. We have the Petavatu, and this is about the ghosts in our tradition, and it often talks of the stories of how they became ghosts as well. So this is an interesting read. I'm learning about this now. I'm also learning the Dhammapada, learning how to memorize some of these poems, and so there. And we also, obviously, we do the 𝗀𝗂𝗶𝗶 and the Sutta Nipatas. We study some things, and we also chant some of these as well. We have the Theravāda Pali, and we have the Therigatha Pali. And these are the teachings from the male disciples of the Buddha and the female disciples of the Buddha. And they also have gathas, which are poems. And they also are, people enjoy reading these type of texts. With the Jataka, the Jatakas are the past life stories of the Buddha. If you're interested in being a bodhisattva or a bodhisattva, for sure you should read these texts. They talk about all the, we could say, past experiences. Often the Buddha is an animal in a past life, and he is also an ascetic, or so it's there are many stories, maybe over 500 of these stories in the commentary, but the root text is just poetry. And we also have included is the 𝗹𝗶𝗸𝗀𝗀𝗃. Some might put it in there, some might not. It comes after the Buddha passed away, and this is a questions. They're the questions of King Milinda. That's why it's called 𝗹𝗶𝗸𝗀𝗃. And we also have the Abhidhamma Pitaka. And this is also grouped into the Khuddaka Nikaya. But let's talk about it as a separate basket. The Abhidhamma, as I said before, is very specific to real Theravada. And we take the suttas, the teachings of the Buddha, and we take a lot of the components, the Dhammas, of the suttas, and we have them all compiled into a series of books, and we call this the Abhidhamma. It talks about the mind and matter, what is kusala, what is wholesome, what is unwholesome, akusala, and so many things. They talk about the different types of consciousness, the different types of matter that can arise, and you have many mathematics, how many with this and how many without that, and it's very important to know this, because it is useful for understanding the underlying content of the suttas when you read the suttas, as well as it's very practice-based. For instance, the 𝗶𝗶𝗃 system of practice is based primarily on the Abhidhamma. So those who are able to finish the course of the 𝗶𝗃 system, they are automatically well-versed in the very basics of the foundations of the Abhidhamma. And so it's very practice-oriented. And people might not think about that. They might think it's a scholarly thing, but actually it's very well-rooted in practice. And if you want to know more about practice, what's under the hood of the practice, the Abhidhamma is the place to look. We have the Dhammasangani. Oh, I don't know if we can explain all of these books, but they're all basically mind and matter and classifications. Then there's the Vibhanga, which is more details about that. We have the Pugala Panyati, and this is about the enlightened, those who have attained enlightenment. We have the 𝗀𝗃𝗀𝗃. The 𝗀𝗃𝗀𝗃 is very important for Theravada, because it's a question and answer about the controversial points and the points of the points of controversy is the English title for this. And there are sects that sects of the religion that formed, and they had different doctrinal views which were incompatible with Theravada. And because of that, there were debates that took place, and they were compiled into the 𝗀𝗃𝗯𝗀. In some cases it's very readable, more so than the other parts of the Abhidhamma, and in some places it's very cryptic. So you'd have to have a really good foundation in the Abhidhamma to understand the conversations and debates that are taking place in the 𝗀𝗃𝗯𝗀. We have the Yamaka Pali, and this is the pairs of questions and answers. It's very complex. And then we have the Patana. And the Patana is, the proper pronunciation is Patana, and this is a detailed analysis of conditional relations and of mind and matter. So this also is very detailed, and it's very well revered in Myanmar. And sometimes they chant, I think there's 5 books of the Patana. Even though we say it's the 7th book of the Abhidhamma, it's actually, there are another 5 books included with the Patana books. And we also have commentaries to them as well, which is the subject of the next section that we're covering. So the commentaries, as well as the Abhidhamma, are very specific to real Theravada. A lot of people don't know about the commentaries. A lot of them might say that the commentaries are made up or they came later. The story goes that when the teachings were brought to Sri Lanka, they were brought with the root text and the detailed teachings, which are the commentaries, and the commentaries were lost after some time. They translated them into Sinhala, and then they fell out of use. The original fell out of use, and then they became lost. I've personally had some books eaten by termites. I've had like snake holes or little termite holes made out of my books, and so I've had this happen before when I was living in Myanmar. For sure, when we have palm leaf books, that can happen. If you don't use a book for a long time, then the termites can easily start eating away at them. So they lost the original Pali teachings, and but they still survived in the Sinhala language. And they were compiled and put back into the Pali language, and this is what we call the commentaries now. And so it's written in a different stylistic Pali language. It's more difficult to read, unfortunately. It's more difficult to read, and it's more technical, and you have to be better at the Pali language, understanding the Pali language in order to understand the commentaries. So the commentaries consist of different components, and the first one is it's a dictionary of terms. So sometimes there are terms in the suttas that might be ambiguous or not clear because of the factor of time, because of the factor of geographical location, culture, or they feared that something would become ambiguous. They sensed that there could be some ambiguity, or maybe there's a more detailed explanation of what these terms mean. And so they explain them, they give more information, they make everything more clear. And so we have the dictionary of terms. And there are the background stories. So there are many stories related to monasteries, or stories related to those who are mentioned in the suttas. And so it's very important to know the background stories of the situation where the teaching took place. And so it has a lot of information of that, And for instance, the Dhammapada, as I said, there was a whole event that took place, and then the Buddha, he uttered a gatha, a stanza of poetry. And so it's if you don't read the commentaries, you can miss so much of the teachings. Because when you read, let's say, the Dhammapada without the commentaries, it's just a summary or a moral of the story, the thing that should be learned from this event. But you are missing why it was said and some of the details. And there might even be some words that are related to the story that you could be missing out on. The same is true with the suttas and in many places. And we also have commentaries to the Abhidhamma. So we also have the expansions of the topics and the points. Sometimes, especially in the Vinaya, there are rules, but the rules weren't mentioned in all the various cases that have come across in the monks, and it's too much for an oral tradition to put all of this together for the oral tradition to recite, and so they were kept in a unified teaching that sometimes the teachings are overlapping again and again and again. If they had a commentary, if they had to chant the commentary every time jhana is samadhi, it's a form of concentration, high level attainment of concentration, and this is so many places in the suttas, and also even in the Vinaya, and so the rules section. So if they had mentioned what jhana is and how to get it and how to attain it and all this, when the Buddha, he mentions just a small phrase for each jhana, or then there's a lot that would be very tiring to chant in an oral tradition. And so they're unified, and we call it, in the database world, we call that normalized. They normalized it out. They took all the common parts, and especially that which is related to meditation, and they put it into a book. Venerable Buddhaghosa took that and put it into a book called the Visuddhimagga, the Path of Purification. And if you're interested in meditation, if you're interested in like the secret teachings, then for sure the secret teachings, you for sure should pick up a copy of this book. It's available for purchase. It's also, there's a public domain version that was translated from a Myanmar translator, and there's a more modern translation from BPS, which was translated as well. And they allow you to download it for free. You can search for the Path of Purification. And that is very good. It has lots of information about the meditation techniques. So all the way up to purification, all the way up to the to Nibbana Supreme. And so we have lastly, we also have the Abhidhamma Sangha, which is the books are very complex, and all the teachings of the Abhidhamma were put into, or the basic general teachings of the Abhidhamma were compiled much later and into the Abhidhamma Sangha, which is studied by just about anyone who wants to learn about the Abhidhamma. They usually pick up the Abhidhamma Sangha first, the Manual of Abhidhamma. And that is available also for purchase, or the ebook is allowed for free download as well. Lastly, we have the Tika. The tika is the sub-commentary. So some things in the commentary were not clear, and in the same way, they made a sub-commentary to explain things further. Why do we need to know the commentaries? Why do we need to know the Abhidhamma? Why do we need to know all these minute details, these component parts of the Dhamma? And there is a good simile or metaphor about a race car driver. So a lot of people, they say, it says do this, it says do that, and it's very clear, but the teachings were meant for memorization, and so they tend to be very brief. And a lot of people can actually put their own interpretations into the teachings. We say the teachings are very wide, and so because of that, there are many ways that the teachings can be misinterpreted. But if we take a regular car that, let's say, my mother drives, or my late grandmother drove, and so there are people who don't know how to drive even a standard transmission. They don't know how to shift gears, etc., what a clutch is, or they just only know about, they know what a clutch is, but they don't know really how to use a car with manual transmission. And so they might just claim, I don't need to know how to drive manual transmission. I don't need to know about gears. I don't need to know about RPM. I don't need to know about the parts and how to fix it and the maintenance. I just pay someone to do it. They can say things like that, and they can survive. They can get from point A to point B very easily, and they can make a good claim that they don't need to know every detail about the car that they drive and how it works and the component parts and everything. But the Dhamma is very complex, and what we can do is we can relate someone like my late grandmother to who drives versus a professional race car driver. So I actually, when I was a layperson, I actually worked with a person who was doing race car driving. He was, I think it was the amateur circuit, or maybe a low-level professional circuit, and they used to, everybody would have the same type of car, but they could modify it a little bit, and there are certain things that you could modify to certain levels, and then they would race. This is called, I think it's called the stock car race, and I think they raced maybe Rabbits, VW, so one of the VW cars, maybe a Rabbit or a Golf, or I think it was one of those, and they would race them. And these are called stock cars. And he was sort of a gearhead. He was telling me about some things that they can do to make the engine faster so they can win the race, obviously. And I decided to research that. I had this hunch that a race car driver, someone who's a professional at the highest level, would need to know how to fix his own car, how it's modified, and during certain conditions to use certain parts, or to modify certain things to make it better and better for certain conditions, etc. And while he's driving, he is aware of how all the parts are functioning. And there's an article in, if you Google Nissan, which is a car company, and you Google the 8 skills to be a professional race car driver, they will list a bunch of skills. The first skill is driving skills, of course, and the second most important skill for a professional race car driver is mechanical knowledge. And it has a little paragraph, and it says that he has to know every single part. It's essential that he knows all about the mechanical inner workings of his car, repairs and modifications, so that he can understand how every part works. We could say every nut and bolt. And this is what makes him a professional. And just like the person I worked with, I think that a lot of them would work their way up. Just like a professional football player, he's not born into the major leagues. He starts out with the little leagues, and then he goes into the high school leagues, and then the varsity league, and then he'll do college football, etc. Whether it's any type of sport, I think that they would have to work their way up at a young age, and then eventually make the professional circuit. So they definitely have to know the mechanical knowledge and the inner workings and every nut and bolt of the car. In the same way, we want to become professional. We want to be professional level Buddhists. That means that we wish to attain the Four Noble Truths. We wish to totally understand it to its fullest. We wish to attain it to the fullest extent, and to attain Nibbana Supreme. And there are 4 levels of enlightenment, but the end goal is the Arahant path, to permanently get rid of greed, hatred, and delusion. So that is why we have the commentaries. We want to have a very narrow path. We don't want the very wide path that was meant for recitation in groups. It has the general framework, and it is definitely very important to stay within that framework. But there is a narrower path that's listed in the commentaries, and that helps avoid ambiguities and keep one on the path without wrong interpretations. So that is one of the problems with all the different sects. They started coming up with their own interpretations. And so the commentaries and the Abhidhamma keep everything very, very clear. What is not Theravada? So it's important to also talk about what is not Theravada that might look like Theravada. So there, especially in the West, we have some of this as well. So we have the Suttanta only. They follow only the suttas, and they don't follow the commentaries, and they don't follow the Abhidhamma. So with that, they have the freedoms to make their own interpretations, and they do, and they pick and choose what they want to follow. Sometimes they say they follow the commentaries, but it's only what they like in the commentaries, what they feel matches in the commentaries, and so that is, these usually also fall into the Suttanta only groups. Then are they Theravada? Is a Suttanta, or someone who rejects some of the commentaries and all, as opposed to someone who accepts all the commentaries, is that if we have a monk, is that person Theravada? Now, Theravada actually is, we could say whether someone is a Theravada monk, it is determined by their ordination. So their ordination, whether they're in communion with the Theravada monastic community, then we have someone who was ordained in a Theravada community, who is ordained according to the commentaries. The ordinations are definitely done according to the commentaries and the details of the books, and that is what makes one Theravada. Whether if they decide to reject some of these commentaries, then picking and choosing what they like, they are still Theravada unless they break some rules or they disrobe. but their philosophy, we would say, is not Theravada. The same is true with EBT. EBT is early Buddhist text. Earlier, I was talking about the Chinese texts. They have some older texts which match very closely, but there might be some missing things, and it can create a lot of faith that even though the teachings were separated so far away from each other, in terms of ending up in China over such a long period of time, that the teachings were so closely preserved, it can give you so much faith. And it's very wonderful. That's all I need to know, actually. But in terms of EBT, they like to focus on the differences. What's left, what is newer, what is older, what might have been corrupted, and these type of teachings, they tend to create lots of doubts. And in the most part, they're not really necessary. For me, I know that the teachings were preserved very well, and people say they match very closely, and you don't really have to worry about even some of the best of the EBTs. They say, the Majjhima Nikaya matches very closely, and if you're worried about something, just follow the Majjhima Nikaya. That's wonderful. I don't need to study EBT in order to know that and appreciate the Majjhima Nikaya or the Samyutta Nikaya or all the Nikayas that I've talked about. And EBT tends to focus on the differences. And as I said before, they were translated from Pali to Sanskrit to Chinese and to English. And so for sure there are many reasons why some things might be missing. And usually the EBT, the early Buddhist text community or monks or people who follow these teachings, usually they don't like the commentaries, and they don't like the, or they pick and choose which commentaries they like, and they like to pick and choose which Dhamma they like, actually, because they have several different versions of a sutta, and they like to choose which one they think is which is valid and which is not valid. And so in the same way, usually they don't like the commentaries, especially the Abhidhamma. And are these monks who follow EBT, are they Theravada? If they are ordained properly, then we would call them Theravada ordained monks. And we are in communion with each other. And but they have a different philosophy. So, for instance, like the Jewish religion is based on the inheritance that's given from the mother's bloodline. So, but you can have a different philosophy, and you could technically be Jewish, but you might like Buddhism, you might like Hinduism, you might like Christianity. But so this would not be the same religion, but in some technicalities we could say that this person is Jewish, or in another sense we could say if they were ordained properly, they are Theravada. The last thing is the Bhikkhuni. The Bhikkhuni also usually comes from, it was extinct, and they brought it back through various means. And what they've decided was that as long as the monks ordain the bhikkhunis, then this is what they call a single side ordination. It should be done with the bhikkhuni side of the ordination and then the bhikkhu side of the ordination by both sanghas. And they brought it back by saying that only the monks need to do it. They also had Mahayana bhikshunis from the Chinese tradition help with the two-side ordination, but I think they've decided that a single side is good enough. Is this valid? There's some room for it to be valid, but we need to have another world Sanghayana meeting in order to fully decide and be in alignment and for communal harmony before we accept the bhikkhuni ordinations as valid. And normally the bhikkhuni is related to the EBT and the Suttanta, and they often also they pick and choose in most cases. There might be some who follow. They pick and choose what they like to follow in terms of the rules. So to conclude the Dhamma talk, we went over the 3 schools of Buddhism. We talked about what is specific to Theravada. We talked about the 3 baskets of Theravada, the Vinaya, the Sutta, and the Abhidhamma, the Vinaya Pitaka, the Vinaya Pitaka, the Sutta Pitaka, and the Abhidhamma Pitaka. We talked about the commentaries, why they're important, like the race car driver that we talked about, and of course you want to become a professional Buddhist who attains Nibbana, for sure you need to know the details. And we've also talked about what is not Theravada. So this concludes my talk to you about what is real Theravada Buddhism. I hope that you can take the teachings. Theravada is focused on attaining Nibbana safely and quickly. I hope you can take the teachings of Theravada, the real Theravada teachings, put them into practice so that you can reach Nibbana safely and quickly. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu.